Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we plunge into the most fascinating research and uncover surprising truths. Today, we're tackling a topic that's, well, both heartbreaking and, as you'll find out, scientifically really quite unexpected. We're talking about the critical state of rhinoceros populations. These incredible animals are tragically being pushed towards extinction again. And it's largely driven by this huge illicit demand for rhino horn. The profits involved, just staggering. But here's the paradox, the really surprising thing we're exploring today. The very horn they're killed for, it might actually hold valuable clues about their health.
Yeah, it could potentially offer a non-invasive way to monitor how they're doing. Imagine that turning this object of, illegal trade into something that could help save them. So our mission in this deep dive is to unpack some recent research that looked really closely at what rhino horn is made of. We're going to dig into what minerals are actually in there, how you take the sample totally changes the results, and what all this means for rhino conservation and also for human consumption of horn products.
You're essentially getting a shortcut to being really well informed on something that's frankly full of surprises and has real-world consequences. Okay, so before we dive into the nitty-gritty science of the horn itself, maybe we should first understand why this demand is so intense. What's driving this devastating trade?
Right. It's complex. There's a whole mix of cultural, medicinal, and sort of social beliefs wrapped up in it. Traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM, has historically used rhino horn, yes, but the way its use has expanded recently is, well, it's pretty alarming. Now you see it being marketed for, gosh, all sorts of severe conditions, cancer, measles, even things like AIDS. But here's the crucial point. Any published results that claim it has medicinal properties, they're contradictory. And honestly, there's just no solid scientific explanation for how it could possibly work inside the body, what scientists call in vivo effects.
Right, so basically no proven benefit, yet this massive demand exists. So scientists decide, okay, let's figure out what this stuff is actually made of. What was the specific aim of this study?
Well, their main goal was pretty clear. They wanted to quantify the minerals, and that includes metals found in rhino horn. And importantly, they wanted to see how different factors might skew those results, like where on a horn you sample, how deep you go, even the color of the sample. They looked at quite a few 182 specimens from 22 different horns. These came mainly from white and black rhinos in zoos, mostly after the animals had passed away.
Okay, so a controlled setting for this initial look.
Exactly. And it's important you remember rhino horn isn't bone, it's actually made of keratin.
Keratin, like fingernails.
Precisely, like your fingernails, toenails, hair. And that matters because we already know from other research that things like hair and nails can reflect the mineral levels in the environment or even in the body. There's a precedent there.
Okay, let's unpack that because, as you hinted, this leads to a really critical challenge revealed by the study. The first big finding, right? The outside of the horn can be heavily contaminated.
Heavily is an understatement. Yes, the outer layer can be significantly contaminated by the environment, specifically by soil. And it's not just, a bit of surface dirt.
Not just something you can wipe off.
No, absolutely not. This finding really undermines a lot of previous assumptions. What the data showed was stark. Surface samples had way higher concentrations of certain minerals compared to samples taken from deep inside the horn core.
Way higher. Like how much higher?
We're talking iron over 30 times higher on the surface, aluminum over 100 times higher, barium over 8 times, copper around 4 times, lead over 3 times higher.
Wow, 100 times more aluminum. That's incredible. It's like the dirt is more significant than the horn itself, chemically speaking, on the outside.
In many ways, yes. And it happens because, well, rhinos aren't exactly keeping their horns pristine. They dig around for food. They famously love wallowing in mud. And through all that activity, soil gets worked into the horn's external surface, which is somewhat porous.
Ah, so it gets embedded.
It gets embedded, exactly. It's not superficial. And the study found that to actually get past this contamination and get a clean sample of the horn itself, you have to drill down at least 1 centimeter.
1 centimeter. Okay, so what does that mean for sampling live animals?
It means accurately sampling a living rhino probably isn't possible with just, say, a quick surface scraping. You'd likely need to sedate or even anesthetize the animal to drill that deep.
Right, which is a huge practical issue if you want to use this for monitoring.
The very big hurdle, yes.
Okay, so not only is the horn seemingly useless for human health benefits based on what you said earlier, but studying it properly in a live rhino is really difficult. So thinking about the human side again, what are people actually ingesting if they do take rhino horn products, assuming maybe it's not contaminated surface stuff? Is there any benefit?
Well, looking at those deep contaminant-free samples, the researchers did find 18 measurable minerals. Some are essential for health, some potentially toxic.
Yeah.
But, and this is the key part, the concentrations were generally really, really low.
Really low. Okay, and this is where it gets, as I teased earlier, really interesting for anyone thinking rhino horn has some special power. What's the bottom line on what people actually get?
The bottom line, the stark conclusion for the analysis is this. If you took a typical daily dose, as used in traditional Chinese medicine, maybe 4 or 5 grams the amount of essential minerals you'd get, things like iron, zinc, copper, it will be way lower than what your body actually needs daily, your dietary reference intakes or DRIs.
Okay.
And it's far, far less than you'd find in just a standard daily multivitamin or mineral supplement.
How much less? Can you give an example?
Sure, take iron. The concentration of iron in the rhino horn samples was almost 500 times lower than what's in a typical daily iron supplement or multivitamin.
500 times lower. So, wow, any health benefit from the minerals is just completely negligible?
Pretty much implausible, yes. It seems incredibly unlikely there's any health benefit happening via mineral supplementation.
It's almost darkly funny given what people pay and what rhinos suffer. So, just to be crystal clear, someone taking rhino horn for iron would get more benefit from, I don't know, licking a fence post or just popping a cheap vitamin pill.
Well, maybe not the fence post, but certainly the vitamin pill, yes.
Yeah.
The science just doesn't support the claims. And there's the flip side, too, risk. While the toxic minerals were low in the clean, deep samples, those surface samples, the ones with soil contamination, they did have significantly higher levels of potentially harmful stuff. So without any kind of quality control, which you definitely don't have in the illegal trade,
Right.
rhino horn products are basically delivering this totally inconsistent and potentially risky mix of compounds.
Okay, so from the human angle,
Yeah.
no real benefits, potential risks if it's contaminated, a total bust. But here's that twist, the paradox we mentioned at the start. The very thing poachers are after might actually help save the rhinos. This is where the research offers a completely different and actually hopeful perspective.
It really does. It shifts the focus entirely. See, there's a condition quite common in black and Sumatran rhinos managed in zoos. It's called iron overload disorder, or IOD. Basically, their bodies store way too much iron, especially in organs like the liver. Diagnosing it usually requires a liver biopsy, which is considered the gold standard.
But I imagine doing a liver biopsy on a rhino is tricky.
Extremely tricky and risky. It's just not something you can do routinely for monitoring these large, powerful animals. It's too invasive.
Okay, so you need another way. And you mentioned earlier the horn could be a sort of non-invasive window. How does that work? Is it like using our hair to test for things?
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Exactly. We know that the mineral levels in human hair and nails can reflect what's going on in the body. They can correlate with body loads of certain minerals or even indicate diseases like iron levels or selenium related to diabetes risk. So the thinking is, since rhino horn is also keratin, it could potentially provide a relatively non-invasive way to track the rhino's internal mineral status, including iron, over time.
That would be a massive help for zoo vets and conservationists. Did this study find evidence this could actually work?
Yes, there were some promising signs. First, the iron concentrations in those deep, clean horn samples. They were actually relatively high compared to the other trace minerals measured. And crucially, there was a big range in iron levels between the different rhinos studied.
Okay, so it varies a lot between individuals.
Exactly. That variation supports the idea that the iron level in the horn might actually reflect the rhino's internal iron load. If every rhino had the same low level, it wouldn't be a useful marker. But the range suggests it could be reflecting individual differences in body iron.
That makes sense.
And they also noted other minerals found in the horn, like selenium, might be useful too. Selenium status could potentially be a biomarker for things like insulin sensitivity, which is another health concern for rhinos in managed care.
Okay, this sounds incredibly promising. A new tool for rhino health. But horns aren't perfectly uniform blocks, are they? They vary. How does that affect using them as a reliable indicator? What did the study find about this? Heterogeneity.
That's a critical question, because yes, rhino horn is not homogeneous. Its composition can vary within the same horn. If you want to use it as a reliable diagnostic tool, you have to understand that variation.
Right, you need consistency.
Precisely. So the researchers specifically looked at factors that might influence the mineral results. And the one that had the most profound impact, it was sample color.
The color of the horn sample, really?
Yes. They found that darker samples described as gray and rust-colored consistently had significantly higher levels of zinc, copper, lead, and barium compared to the lighter white-colored samples. Gray samples actually showed the highest levels for those four minerals.
Huh. Why would color make such a difference?
Well, previous studies using CT scans had already noted a dark core inside some horns, often rust or gray. And that dark core was linked to higher levels of melanin and calcium. This study confirmed that they found higher calcium in the dark center core samples. So the color seems directly linked to chemical differences.
So if you're a researcher using this, you can't just grab any old piece of horn. You need to be specific about the color you're comparing.
Absolutely. Comparing a white sample to a gray sample might give you misleading results about the rhino's actual mineral status. You need to compare like with like, color-matched samples.
Okay, color's huge. What else mattered? Did it matter where on the horn you took the sample?
Yes, sampling position relative to that center core also made a difference, though perhaps less dramatically than color. They found variations in copper, zinc, and barium, depending on whether the sample came from the center or the dorsal, ventral, or lateral sides, basically top, bottom, or sides. Samples from the center tended to have higher levels of these minerals, but this often ties back to color too. Center samples were more often dark, while side samples were more likely to be white. So those two factors are a bit tangled.
Right. Confounded, as scientists say.
Huh.
Okay, what about the horn's growth? They grow pretty fast, right? Does the mineral content change from the base near the head out to the tip?
They do grow fast, yeah, about 3 to 9 centimeters a year, which is quite something. But interestingly, the study found no consistent pattern of minerals increasing or decreasing along the length of the horn from base to tip.
Oh, so it's not like tree rings showing distinct years.
Apparently not, or at least not consistently for these minerals. The variations they saw along the length seemed mostly random, or maybe just reflecting minor fluctuations over time rather than a clear gradient buildup or depletion. And another practical finding, they compared the anterior horn, the front one, the posterior horn, the smaller back one, from the same rhino. The mineral content between the two horns was generally very similar, especially for iron.
Oh, that's useful. So you could potentially sample either horn and get comparable data.
It seems so, particularly for iron, which is a key one for the IOD monitoring idea. That gives researchers more flexibility in the field.
Okay, so summing up all these sampling details, the color, the position, the depth, the main takeaway for future research or monitoring is?
The absolute key takeaways are: 1. You must sample deep enough, at least that 1 centimeter, to avoid the environmental contamination on the surface. That's non-negotiable for accuracy. And 2, you really need to standardize your sampling, especially by comparing samples of similar color to account for the horn's natural internal variations. Get those right, and you have a much better chance of getting a true picture of the rhino's internal state.
Makes sense. Now, this sounds like a really solid study, but like all research, I assume it had limitations.
It did, yes.
Oh.
The main one, as we touched on, is that all the horns came from rhinos, managed in zoos, and mostly from North America.
So not wild rhinos.
No, not wild rhinos. And that means we don't know the full picture for wild populations or rhinos living on different continents, maybe with very different diets or exposure to different types of soil and environments. Their horn composition could vary more or in different ways.
Okay, that's an important caveat for generalizing.
It is. But despite that limitation, the fundamental findings about the contamination issue, the importance of deep sampling, the influence of color, those are really significant foundational insights.
Yeah, they really lay the groundwork for how to approach this whole area moving forward, pointing towards potentially new ways to understand and protect these animals.
Absolutely. The findings are definitely significant, both for conservation science and just for understanding the biology of the rhino itself.
What an incredible journey this deep dive has turned out to be. Just to recap the core points for everyone listening, we've learned rhino horn does contain minerals, but that surface contamination from soil is a massive, critical issue for any analysis. For humans thinking of consuming it, the health benefits seem negligible, essentially zero based on mineral content, and there are potential risks if the horn product is contaminated. But for the rhinos themselves, that same horn presents this really promising, relatively non-invasive way to potentially monitor their health, especially for serious conditions like iron overload disorder.
Exactly. It truly could transform this object, currently driving poaching, into a potential source of life-saving biological data for the rhinos. A really unexpected turn.
It really is, and that brings us to a final provocative thought for you to mull over. Isn't it fascinating how sometimes the very things threatening a species, in this case, the demand for horn-driving poaching, can push us to understand that species more deeply, and how that understanding can lead to completely unexpected insight? This desperate fight against poaching has kind of inadvertently shed light on new possibilities for conservation science, for animal welfare. So, the question to leave you with is, what other seemingly paradoxical sources of information might be out there in our world just waiting to be unpacked, waiting to give us a deeper understanding, and maybe even novel solutions to complex problems?